talk this week about, excuse me, I want to talk this week about, start again. I want to talk this week about narrative. The narrative of your life and our lives, or the story of our lives, and how we're dominated by it, how we're dominated by our story, and how hard it is for almost everyone to get out of the way of that. The whole experience of awakening is described in some ways more than anything else by the loss of story. Your narrative falls away. I think for some people it's an absolute shattering of narrative, which leaves those people in a state of extraordinary confusion, with nothing to grab onto. Because what are you and who are you without your story? I was born here, I had this life, these things happened to me, that's who you are. So if that gets shattered, then you have to reorganize and reconceptualize everything. And for people who have sudden awakening, there's a process of what is often years of becoming really able to live without narrative. You know, Eckhart Tolle describes sitting on a park bench for 2 years. And I've described my own awakening as something that started 40 years ago with an LSD trip, and then 40 years of trying to accommodate the knowledge of the understanding of what took place there. And then the awakening that took place a couple of years ago was the falling away of what I thought of as certain fundamental aspects of being Bruce. One of them was career. Just gone as an interest even. Just gone. Another thing that fell away, which I don't talk about a lot, but will be confusing to you probably, was my spiritual life. Gone. I didn't quite know what to hold on to in it. But the interest in it was very diminished. It really just wasn't there very much. And I didn't even know how to teach spirituality, but I keep sitting here and attempting to teach something which is in fact pretty much teaching nothing. Because mostly spiritual life is this life. And Rudy had a real handle on that, which is helpful. That makes it helpful for me to be able to continue what appears to be the old practice. But in the end, it really is practice, because in awakening, practice is over. Now it's just being. Being what you practiced being. And the practice of our particular teaching is, please help me to surrender. So it had two powerful components. One was asking for help, and the other was letting go. Help is such an important part of the spiritual dynamic. And really what happens in the awakening experience is that help comes in a huge way. Not that it isn't there all the time in your life, but help comes and it takes care of it for you. And what does it do? It gets rid of you. Surrenders you. So that surrender that you've been practicing now is state of being. It's in a state of allowing and just being. So this awakening thing took place, and for some people it's so completely radical that they don't know how to go home. They don't know how to walk into their environment because they don't even know how those people became part of their narrative. Wife, children, whatever left, grandparents, uncles, aunts. It's like, what is all this? And it's very difficult. For others, it's like they are part of your life. They are part of the story. And when the story falls away, it doesn't go away, which is a really interesting thing. It's still there. There's the family, there's the relatives, they're all looking at you like you're the same old person. And you're looking at them as part of the fabric of your being, part of the fabric of being itself. They arise into the moment of your life and then they dissipate. As is true with everyone in our lives. People arise for a period of time and they're not there. And I mean that like someone walks in the door, spends an hour with you and leaves. They are really, when you're awake, they're gone. They're gone. Then they come back as 100% manifestation, engaged, gone. What happened to me was this awakening took place, and then I had to do a Broadway show. And I asked my mentor here, Bart, I said, what would Buddha have done if he had his enlightenment and had to do a Broadway show? And Bart very intelligently, I think, said, well, we're about to find out. So I spent the 2 years after the awakening working my ass off. And much of Bruce that had gone away had to reconstitute, clearly, to do this. You can't do this in a vacuum. And so this Bruce thing was there, wildly present. I mean, really present for this whole thing, and totally invested. And I kept saying, you know, you can surrender. You can just let this thing be. You don't have to go through all the internal drama of what's going on, the hope, the ambition, the whole thing. And I said, why should I not let happen what's happening? Why should I try to have a reaction to it that isn't the reaction that I'm having? So I didn't. I just said, okay, let this thing take place. And it was something I reported on quite a bit on these talks, actually. And the London version, the Manchester London, was pretty euphoric, as any of those of you who have listened to that may understand. And then the New York experience was very different. And I didn't do a lot of reporting during New York for a lot of reasons. One is I didn't even know how to talk about it. But it was heavy. It was heavy, and it had a lot of darkness in it. And I had a feeling of dread from the minute I arrived in New York. And I felt I was walking into a, you can call it a lynching or a crucifixion or whatever. I knew right from the beginning it would not end well, and I did not know why I felt that. And I could not shake that feeling, and I went through the whole process feeling something was not going to be as joyous as what happened in England. And of course, those of you who've been following the story know that that's partly true. I mean, the show happened, is happening, is, I think, a completely wonderful expression of everything I had dreamt it would be from day one. And it was really a beautiful beautiful thing to create something like this. It wasn't easy. It was very different than the London experience, but very beautiful to watch it come together. And very sad inside to think that somehow this wasn't going to come to the conclusion that I wanted, or hoped for, or rooted for. And then the show opened. It was a glorious thing. Many of you were there. Glorious for me. People continue to seem to really love what's being put on stage. At least that's what they tell me. Except for the the critics, the press, and the critics had a very, very dark and negative response to Ghost, and I really avoided reading them, but it wasn't hard to hear from everyone who approached me what those reviews were saying, and I've talked about it again in these tapes, and by staying detached from it, I wasn't able to be totally free because a lot of it entered the system, but I watched it enter the system. I lived it because it was happening and was real, and I watched something that I love deeply and that represents so much of what I hoped would be a legacy, if you will, something that would be left behind as a kind of living statement of love and compassion, a sense of what the larger universe is about, the idea of love surviving death, even life on some level surviving death. The whole show, as you know from the movie, was a singing, dancing embodiment of that idea. And it was hated by the press, which is a very interesting thing. And I just sat and relaxed with all of that and just said, okay. And then this week, the narrative got very dark. We found out that the London show is closing because there aren't enough people going. That the Holland show, which was supposed to open in 2 months, has been canceled because European audiences have dropped off by 30% because of the economy. There's a whole long list of things that are happening, and even in New York there's a real sense of struggle. And I really took all that information in, and there was a sense of real kind of despair and sadness and loss and disappointment that, we worked for 7 years on this thing, and I watched it all come in and weight itself down within the system of this being here. And the day after all this information came, a friend came to visit. A friend who is in deep and powerful pursuit of awakening, but who is very trapped by narrative, who has a very heavy narrative in a life story that is hard to deal with, and who wants awakening in many ways so he can escape the narrative of his life. And I had to work with this person for 24 hours. It was really interesting. But what was especially interesting was that as he came in with this narrative, I got to look at my own narrative. And my own narrative just absolutely went, just evaporated. And I looked at the show, I looked at the story that was coming into the system, and I just went, oh well. And I started to feel, it was so odd. Instead of sad and depressed and angry, although those were still elements playing inside, I started to feel liberated, deeply liberated, that I could let it go. And the more I talked to my friend and I watched how he could not let go of his story, the more I realized how important it is to let go of story. And then I sat with him and we just talked and talked. And as we talked, I found that I was able to bring him to this place, or we were able to get to this place together, where he pushed story aside. Past just pushed one way, future another way, and we just sat together and spoke, and just were together. And he started smiling and being joyful, and clear-headed, and open, and available, everything you want a human being to be. And because I was working with him, of course, I was in exactly the same space. And so neither of us had narrative. We both were completely empty of story, and we were just being together. And there was a real blurring of identity, where he and I were the same being. We were the same person is the wrong word, but entity, wholeness, and being is the right word. And it was really beautiful, and it was really wonderful, and we were both completely free. And then his narrative went coming back. And I had to, in order to help him at all, stay narrative free. The only way I could be of substantial help was not to bring Bruce back into the equation. No judgment, no story element comparing our stories to each other, which is what most people do all the time. Oh, well, I have this problem. Oh, really? Well, I have that problem. I don't know. Back and forth, and no real hearing of each other. So by getting out of the way, there was real hearing, real openness, real availability. And it was a remarkable journey for us, actually. But what really happened, more than what I was giving to my friend, was what he was giving to me. And what he gave me was the loss of what was for me and what feels for me the biggest and most significant thing right now in my life was this show that I devoted 2 solid years to, and all of its future possibility starting to crumble away in my life. And what was being left was not a loss, it was a freedom. Now, I may give another talk in a month or 2 months, and I won't have this same sort of perspective. Narrative may creep back into the picture. I may get really sad and I may get really grief-stricken because it could be the death of something I love deeply. And if that happens, I will honestly talk about that. I will share it with you. But what I want to share in this moment is what it means to let go of every narrative that arises. In the early days of my film career, where I started to learn this process, I did one film which was the most personal, which was a film called My Life. Well, let me even back up a little bit beyond that. Jacob's Ladder, which was also a lot of these very personal films. Jacob's Ladder, I stood outside the theater the day the film opened to hear the audience's praising of the film. Basically, that's what I was hoping to hear. And I'm standing outside the theater waiting for audiences to come out after the first show to hear how much they loved it. And the first guy that came out of the theater stormed out before the credits were over. And I'm standing there, and he yelled out to nobody in particular, but clearly to me, "If I ever meet the writer of that film, I'll kill him." And I went, oh. Okay. And then the reviews came out, and they were equally damning on most levels. And something I'd worked years and years to create was now perceived as a complete failure. And hated by a lot of people and critics. Not everybody, but a lot. So I had to process that. It was really hard. But My Life, which followed that, which is a lovely story of a man who is dying and finds out that his wife's going to have their first child and he will not live long enough to meet that child. So he decides to leave a videotape about his life to give to that child so he'll know who his father was. But in the process of making the video about his life, realizes he hasn't a clue to who he is. He has no sense of himself at all. And so it's about the making of that videotape, which really, in a sense, gives him himself. Well, the reviews for that film were more damning than anything I have ever come across. And you know, in Hollywood, they give you the reviews in a stack of a book like this, and so you can go through them one after the other. And don't ask me why I went through them, because the New York Times and the LA Times, which is where all my friends lived, were so horrible that I was already devastated. But I just kept going through them, and it got worse and worse and worse. And it took me about 9 months to get through it. And it was really, really painful. I mean ego decimation and humiliation and shame and all of that stuff that goes along with being badly received in the public's eye. So 9 months went by and I was back to myself, and my career continued, and almost every film I've ever done has had kind of mixed reviews, except I described Stuart Little 2, which had wonderful reviews, and that was, I honestly did that film because I wanted to speak to children about kind of putting spiritual seeds into their little heads, but the studio took every little seed and pulled it out. And so by the time the film was actually there, it had none at all, hardly any. It had a kind of substance of what I wanted to say, but no specifics. And so that film the public loved, and the critics loved. Actually, the public didn't love it so much, but the critics did. And then finally, I got to the last of the films I've done. Was a film called Time Traveler's Wife, and I read the review in the New York Times and the LA Times the night that it opened, because now it's on the internet, and they were like below the belt punches. And it was horrible. It was really horrible. And I thought, oh my God, but 18 hours later, it was gone. I was done. I finished. The suffering, the processing was done. And I went, this is everything Rudy talked about. Rudy said to me, in the beginning, you're going to have a pattern in your life that will take you 6 years to get through. Then it will take 6 months. Then it will take 6 weeks, 6 days, 6 hours, 6 minutes, 6 seconds, a sixth of a second to get past. And that's exactly what it's been for me. I've had to go through these processes of overcoming all of these, what I call public humiliations, or whatever you want to call them, and deep disappointments, because the films don't make money yet, and all that other stuff. But I got to the point where I could go, okay, 18 hours, I can do it. The thing with Ghost, didn't even have that, because the universe brought me this friend who showed me how sad narrative is to hold on to. If you're holding on to your life story with its humiliations and disappointments and regrets and embarrassments, if you're holding on to all the bad stuff, or let's turn that around, if you're holding on to all the great stuff, that you don't want to let go of the fact that you were president of the senior class, and that you were, you had the biggest business that ever happened on the planet, and you were the wealthiest person that ever lived, and you had such power, and you were Ronald Reagan once, or whatever it is, If you can't let go of that stuff, it's all going to get taken away. I don't care how miserable you were or how great you were, it's all going to get taken away. That is inevitable. No way around it, guys, no way around it. So meditation and spiritual work is really the letting go of all that stuff now, for two reasons. One, it's going to get taken away anyway, so when it goes, you're going to have to let it go. And it's a lot easier to let it go piece by piece, trust me, than to let the whole thing go at one fell swoop. Very few people can pull that off with any kind of equanimity. Everything you ever are, were, dreamed of, thought you could be, everything gone. That's a bitch. But if you work it through in spiritual practice, in meditation, letting things fall away, you get good at it, or you get better at it. And then, in my situation, when they take a lot of the big stuff away, when they take your career and your spiritual life, when they take that stuff away, and you think they've taken everything, honestly, you discover there's more yet to let go of. But they really take that too. And I felt this musical thing, the one last thing that I had as a kind of projection of future and, comfort and all these things that it kind of represented, when that went, or is in the process, I really don't know where it is right now, but I can see it falling away one way or the other. Instead of seeing it as punishment, instead of seeing it as judgment, Instead of seeing it as anything, I see it as opening, freeing, liberating, and allowing me to be empty. Empty of all the stuff of story, but full of being, full of presence. And I know it's hard to sell presence to people because nobody knows how to do it. The fact is, every one of you is doing it, but nobody knows how you're doing it, or do you identify with it. What you identify with is the story that presence is observing. Each of you is watching your life with this amazing presence, but what you love about it is the story. Take away the story and you're going, oh, what am I? Where am I? Well, you're the thing that was there the whole time. That's the thing that's watching it. The presence. And they can't take that away. You know why? Because it never goes away. Nisargadatta says, I was never born and I will never die. And people hear that and go, what does that mean? What's he talking about? You know, what he's talking about is your story will go away. It will, trust me. But you will not. But you see, it's the little you and the big you. The big you can't go anywhere because it was never born and will never die. It is infinite being. And the only way to know that is to let go of your story long enough to see it. And what happens when we sit here in class, which is really wonderful, is that for a period of maybe 4 seconds or 4 minutes or maybe 40 minutes, you pull that off. You pull it off, and what happens when you pull that off is you experience being. You experience presence. And the experience of presence, conscious awareness of presence, is so extraordinary, so beautiful, so powerful, so desirable, that you will drive, as you all have, 3 hours, 4 hours in each direction to come and sit in it. You come to sit in your own presence. You think maybe in your mind it's Bruce's presence, or Bruce will give me this presence. Well, first, there's no Bruce here. There's just presence. And 2, that presence is with you at home before you even get in the car. You do not have to get in the car to come to get presence. You just have to be present. But don't ask me why. It's the hardest thing to do in the world. It's so hard to be present. And so you come to a place where it feels easier, where you understand, I can be present in this space. I can't be present at my job. I can't be present with my husband or wife. I can't be present watching television. I can't be present driving the car. I can only be present sitting with Bruce. That's ridiculous. It's completely ridiculous. You can be present wherever you want. But when you get in a space like this where we're all together and everyone is sitting, and this non-presence, or excuse me, this non-Bruce presence sits with you, you get to do the same thing. You get to just let go of you and be present. And there is nothing you want more in human life than that. Nothing. And for one reason, you can get everything else, and it's not yours. You won't keep it. It will all be taken away. So everything you fight to get in life is very temporary. And you're not going to be very copacetic or generous when it's taken away. And if you watch it being taken away while you're still here, most of you are going to get angry at the world. You're going to want to vote the president out of office because some other person will bring you the thing you didn't have. You're going to want to, tear down the world because the world is causing you all this grief. That's the worst response. The response is, it's not the world, it's you. It's your story. Your story is going to change, alter, for better, for worse, and it's going to end. And if you come here, or you sit home by yourself, and you sit quietly, and you let a few minutes of storyless you exist, your heart fills with so much joy. Your body feels so vibrantly alive, even if it hurts. It's so alive. Your story is so unimportant. It just isn't there. And what you feel is, I am. This eternal presence is there. It's your very animating aspect. When you were a little child, it was there full time. And then as your parents and your friends and everyone started to develop and you started to hold on to a character, a narrative, then you lost that. But it didn't go anywhere, it just got covered up. So we're scrubbing it away. We're scrubbing here and scrubbing. We're helping dismantle the character. We're dismantling the narrative and freeing you back to what you always have been. That's the whole process. That's all we're doing. And it's going to get hard. They're going to take something you've worked on for the past 7 years and they're going to go like that. And you have two choices at that moment. One is to go, thank you, Lord. And the other is to get really pissed and angry and try to blame everyone and everything and try to live a life of complete frustration and regret. Go for it. It's a choice. You can do it. And you may actually experience real grief. I really do have moments of true grief. But I look at them and go, well, of course you would have true grief. This is a really sad loss. You wouldn't be human if you didn't have true grief. But it doesn't linger. It rises up, it fills the space, it does its dance, and then it goes. And in this case, they brought me a gift of a friend who had much more to grieve than I did. And it was really a great gift. And I just said thank you for the whole process. Because what we're all doing is trying to know how to be present in the midst of unbelievable drama. Unbelievable and compelling drama. And I know, I've sat with every one of you, I know your dramas. And they're good. They are good dramas. If we could get them done right, we could sell them to Hollywood and you could make a fortune on your drama. But I don't know if anyone would want to go see it. And that's the problem. You've had to live it, and that's that. But what we all want is why we're here today. We all want, let me out of here. Free me of this drama. Free me of this drama. But let me put it this way. This friend of mine who came, who wanted to be freed of this drama, really wanted to kill the character, wanted to destroy the narrative, end the narrative. It doesn't work that way. You have to accept you, and you have to accept the drama. You have to accept the story. You have to allow it to be. Because before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After your awakening, you will still be there. This body will still be there. You still will go to work. You still have a wife and kids and a husband and children. Whatever it is, you have your story. And it's still there. But your reaction to and your relationship to that story is now completely different. Completely different. Now it's an openness, a clarity, and a realization that this whole thing is a passing, if you will, almost phantasmagoria of fascination. It's so compelling, it's so amazing. But if you watch it from this place of being, instead of being caught by it, you just watch it with amazement and gratitude. Very different. Or a sense of awe. Like, you won't understand very much, but you will be blown away by the simple fact of it, that it's happening, that it's real, that you are observing it, and that it's there. In fact, there won't even be you observing it. That's the most amazing thing. You are it. There is no two. There's no you and it. There is only it. Or better, there's only happening. Happening is all there is. happening. And it will be beautiful happening and terrible happening, and beautiful happening and terrible happening, and so-so happening, and okay happening, and amazing happening, and horrific happening. It will not end. This will not make it end, it will not make it different. You cannot kill your character, you cannot kill the happening. It just happens. All you will be is free in it. And that's worth it. And I will tell you, you're already free in it. You just don't know it. And when you know it, which is called realization, it changes. It changes. The story is there, but it's not your story. It's the story. It's life itself. And it's an amazing thing. So, as much as possible and as often as possible, sit still without your story. Find time to be still and be present. And for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, an hour, let it go. If you're lucky, you will have 24 hours or a week or 2 weeks or a month of no story, which happens a lot, called satori. And then your story takes over again. But it's okay, because it will stop taking over again at some point, and at some point the story just frees you itself. It just, and you awaken to yourself. And until that point, you practice. Practice what it means to live without story. And that's what real meditation is. That's what Rudy taught. It's really the great part of Rudy's teaching, how to live beyond story. And if you sit every day and you experience that stillness, it will become such a hunger for you, it will become such a nourishment, such a salvation, such a joy, that you will want it more and more, and at some point help will come and you will surrender, or as I've learned, it surrenders you. Done. Any questions?
Do you feel, after the experience with the show, at this time, that to me it sounds like you're almost like a diver or somebody who was underwater and was coming up for air that was desperately needed, and now you got what you wanted. You got it's like tension and release in a way.
In a way, yeah. I mean, the show was full of tension. The experience of it created a lot of tension, in terms of hope and expectation and acceptance and all of that stuff.
And now you have that.
Now I know.
The release.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, let it go.
Well, do you think that you could have, or it is possible to do a show like that and be open and be in it without a story and without expectations?
I really was in London. The whole London experience, because it was such an unknown, and I didn't know what it would turn into, and I just was whatever it is. And if you look at the talks from that period, they're pretty much of that. And then the New York thing became much heavier for a lot of reasons. One, it was my hometown, sort of. New York, America, people were there was a lot of expectation. I had a lot of expectation myself. The weight of story just took over. And I looked at it taking over, and I said to everybody, I said, it's taking over. I said, this is hard. And I had the choice to do this thing of take a breath and rise above it. And I said, no, why should I change what is? Why should I do that? Live this thing as it's happening in its own truth.
But isn't that the work, rising above?
Yes, but what I've been trying to teach for the last 2 years, and I think it's important, is you have a choice to rise above it or to be of it, to be in it. Not to try to change what is, but be what is. And I chose to be what is because I think it's a more powerful teaching. Rising above it is to always reach for other. Being in what is transforms you. it's essential. It's an essential element to what I've been trying to teach. But here's the problem: if you don't have the muscle for what I'm describing, you're going to get ground to pieces, which is good on one level, but it is really painful. It's really hard, and a lot of people don't pull it off spiritually. They end up ground up and miserable, crawling around like raw hamburger on the ground for the rest of their lives. That's not what you want. So spiritual life gives you the ability to let go, let go, let go, and then you come to a point where you realize what you're trying to do is to get out of what is. What you're trying to do is to free yourself of what is, and that is not, for me, the best teaching at this point. The best teaching for me is be present with what is. And it is really powerful. It's the real work, as far as I can tell, to be present in this.
Well, it would seem to me that once desire comes in, you could be present with what is, but as soon as you want it to be a certain way or change, well, I guess that's not being with.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right. No, you will start to learn what it means to have desire. And I'm learning about, I've talked about this earlier, about what I call rooting interest. This is a whole other talk, but there is what I call your desire, Marty's desire, Bruce's desire for something. And then there is what I call elemental desire. Elemental is the desire that comes out of pure being. It is the desire to breathe, the desire not to experience pain, the desire for love. All of these, what I call elemental, they don't have anything to do with your story. They are the human story. They are life itself story. This is what is there, and when you arrive at the elemental, you realize this is what it's going to be. There is a real rooting interest for success, not only your success, but everybody's success, and for survival, and for all of these things to be. And it's part of a natural process. It's a natural thing that it's there. There's also, deeper than that, a place where you don't need to do that at all. You can actually go to a place where there's no rooting interest, where there's nothing at all, where nothing predominates. And it's really a journey into the elemental space of nothingness, which precedes all of the wishing for, wanting, needing, all of these things. But even someone as great as Christ, when it came to the end of his life, had very strong elemental biological fear and bargaining with God, saying, please no, take this cup from my lips. I don't want this. And if that can be true of somebody of that development, then why should we be different? And when my granddaughter was being born and they were having, it seemed like a very long delivery, and I thought something had gone wrong, I started to want her life. I wanted her to live. I wanted her to be okay. And it was really early in my own sort of spiritual development as in the enlightened or awakened space. And so I said, well, then who is wishing for this? Is this Bruce wishing for this? And it felt, no, this is life wishing for it. Life wishes for life to survive. It's huge. And life grieves. It does all of those things, but it's not your personal story. So you just start to really get in touch with all of that, and that's really strong stuff. And then that stuff teaches you, and you start to go deeper and deeper and deeper into that, and what you come into is, it begins as bliss and ends up as nothing. As nothing. Qualityless. Period. But that journey into that, you've got to get rid of you. You have to get rid of the personal story for that real journey to happen. And I'm just talking my experience, because there may be people out there in the non-duality Advaita community who say, no, it all gets wiped out at once. Not my experience, and not the experience of everyone I talk to, but there are people for whom that happens. But so I'm talking about a process of deeper and deeper awakening. And it's amazing. That's all I can say. And the big heavy-duty stuff comes in a real way. And if I had lived ghost without attachment during that last phase, I don't know that what's happening right now would have happened. If I had just said, oh, it's okay, I cannot be attached, I can just let it go. The power of what I'm going through right now is really, I feel, significant. There's a significance to the cleansing, if you will, or the freeing that had to happen by being part of it, not being separate from it. Does that mean anything?
Mhm.
Okay. Wait.
Seems that it would be only, it would make sense that you would have that responsibility to follow through on that project and to really, truly, I mean, that is the presence of really doing that work, like really being involved in it, being there.
That's what it felt
That's
like.
what-
That's what it felt like. And when I was in London, I was just being there, and I had nothing to do. They literally didn't really want me there. So I just sat there and did nothing. But that presence was so powerful, it began to exert an effect on the entire group of people on the production. Just presence
And
fills
isn't
a
it
space.
this work that we do that allows us to be in that
It
deep
allows us
presence?
to get to that space, but in the end, for me, no, it didn't. It didn't get me there. It made me a candidate for awakening. A candidate is someone who announces their availability to the universe, and then at some point, the universe goes, okay. But I think somehow you have to prepare it. And I don't know what that means really, because I've met people who did very little preparation, but got it anyway. And those guys, I guess maybe, I don't know what happens to them, but I just felt I had no choice but to do this work. And Rudy was who I found. And that work for me was tremendous in its transformative power. So I think you prepare the vessel, and then it decides what it wants to do with you. But I actually was at a point where I didn't care. And I said very clearly, I don't care if I ever get awakened or not awakened. It didn't matter, because I was living the life of an awakened being. I was conscious, I was living as consciously as I could. And when awakening happened, it was by surprise. But I think it happened because I had stopped trying to get awakened. Because when it doesn't matter, it can happen. When it matters, and you really are pursuing it, you're really in the process of saying, I want something other. I don't want this, I want to be that. And as long as you don't want what you are, you're already avoiding the one thing that will allow this to happen, which is accepting what you are is the doorway to awakening. Not trying to get there, trying to be where you are. That's the key for everyone. Be where you are. So, hope that's not too confusing. And I know this is a long talk, but it'll be continued, I'm sure, because there's a lot more drama probably ahead. On the other hand, it's been important to voice this, because I think if this has any longevity at all, I think a lot of people need to understand in the awakening experience, it's not all a bed of roses, and that there is process, at least as far as I can tell, and we all need to go through it. And this is my drama, the Bruce drama, but the Bruce drama, I think, speaks to the universal drama that everyone going through this will experience. So I'm just trying to share it as best I can. Okay? Great. Thank you, guys.